Live from Bloomberg's World Headquarters in New York, I'm Shanali Bassick.
And from our studios in Washington, D.C., I'm Kaylee Lyons. Welcome to Bloomberg Crypto, a look at the people, transactions, and technology shaping the world of decentralized finance.
And Kaylee, what a rally it's been. Bitcoin soars past $45,000 to its highest level since 2022. That eye-popping run is fueled by the spot Bitcoin ETF hype.
And as investors eagerly await that expected ETF approval from the SEC, we'll talk with Glen Goodman, author of The Crypto Trader.
And we'll also hear from John Palmer. He's the president of CBOE Digital. There are still concerns about regulatory clarity and the risks tied to crypto.
All right, all of that is ahead. But first, let's get a snapshot of the market. The best way to do that on your Bloomberg terminal is CRYP Go. That is your function. And what you will see is that there's an interesting divergence between different digital assets today. On the one hand, as Shanali, you mentioned, Bitcoin is flying. We've dropped just below the $45,000 level, which we hadn't reached going back to April of 2022. Still, though, we're up about 3% on the day. We're trading right around there now after what was a banner year for Bitcoin, up more than 150% in 2023. All of that on optimism around potentially the approval coming of a spot ETF. MicroStrategy, of course, one of the equities often seen as a Bitcoin proxy, holds a lot of it on his balance sheet. It's up 9.5% on the day, but it's not filtering through to everything that touches the crypto space. Shanali, Polygon, one of those altcoins out there, is down by about 3.5%. And interesting to see Coinbase, the largest public exchange, down by nearly 7% on the day. So it doesn't seem like the optimism is filtering through everywhere and everything, Shanali.
Certainly a lot of questions about whether a new ETF is helpful or hurtful for Coinbase's prospects in the future. But let's first, Kaylee, talk about that historic rise in Bitcoin, that 158% jump. It is not the best jump that it's ever had on record, but certainly meaningful that we saw in 2023. And to your point, we've hit 45,000 this year, but it's been wavering around that level, and we have not yet seen the SEC approve that ETF yet. Now, what then happens from here? Has the run-up really led to enough price declines that have priced in that movement that an SEC approval would lead to, or do you see people start taking profits after we see those approval processes? The bulls, like a Mike Novogratz, believe that you would test the highs that we saw in 2021, flirting with closer to 70,000 later in the year. But again, time will tell, with a lot of risk still on the surface after that ETF approval does or does not happen.
Yeah, Shanali, of course, we're going to have more on this throughout the show. First, though, we do want to mention some breaking news that has just crossed the wire. According to Crimson, which is Harvard's student newspaper, Harvard President Claudine Gay is going to resign this afternoon. This is coming just 6 months and 2 days into her presidency and follows the intense scrutiny she has been under following testimony in Congress late last year regarding anti-Semitism on Harvard's campus. Of course, the former president of Penn, Liz McGill, had already resigned in the aftermath of that. Claudine Gay was under increasing pressure to do so as well. And despite the backing of Harvard's board, essentially, of her presidency, again, the Crimson is reporting today that Claudine Gay will be resigning this afternoon. So we'll bring you more on this as we get more information, but we'll turn back now to matters of crypto because Bitcoin is kicking off the new year on a high note, gearing up for the SEC's decision on spot Bitcoin ETFs in the next week. Here's Kathy Wood of ARK Invest and her take on this.
We're as optimistic about Bitcoin as we ever have been. But there are a few regulatory and tax uncertainties. There are now other products out there that we can use to gain exposure to Bitcoin in this moment. And it's just a moment of uncertainty between now, we think, and January 8th to 10th, somewhere in that range, perhaps. But we, out of an abundance of caution, didn't want to take any risk.
All right, let's bring in now Bloomberg Intelligence Strategy for ETF analyst. James Seyffert is with us now. So, James, you obviously have been at the forefront of all of this. I know that you were one of the first to talk about January next week really being the deadline here. Could we see this happen sooner than January 10th?
Yeah, so the window I'm watching is January 8th to January 10th, so that's Monday to Wednesday of next week, and that's the date that I've been focused on, those 3 days that I've narrowed in on since basically December 1st. So it's possible that these issuers could get sort of like backroom SEC sign off that you're going to launch on this day or we're going to give approvals on this day. I'm still waiting for the official approval orders to come sometime in that window I just spoke about, January 8th to January 10th. So those are the dates I'm watching and when I'm expecting it to happen.
James, we are seeing new participants in the ETF world, people that are needed to really make the process work. You see Jane Street starting to come up as a brokerage, an authorized participant. You see JP Morgan start to show up. How significant is that as we move towards this process?
Yeah, so essentially, we know the SEC needs and wants all of this finalized before they launch, right? So there's two processes. Those approvals I just talked about comes under something called 19B4, but you also need the prospectuses or the S1 signed off, and the SEC needs to see authorized participants on those documents before they're going to sign off and allow these things to go effective or essentially launch. So it's possible that we're looking at about 11 filers right now. It's possible that we could see approval for all 11, but maybe not all of them are ready to go. Maybe they don't have signed authorized participant agreements. Jane Street is the one that's number one up there, right? They're on 4 different filings that we've seen so far. But you have Virtu on there as well. You have Karen Fitzgerald on one of the filings, and as you mentioned, you have JP Morgan, which is interesting because of Jamie Dimon's view on crypto. But there's a lot of others that we haven't seen. We don't know who has authorized participation agreements. We know Grayscale likely has them filed, but they haven't included in their filings. There's a bunch of other issuers that are probably trying to scramble right now and get finalized deals with these authorized participants, which are typically big broker dealers or market makers. So I'm sure if anyone doesn't have any of these things officially signed yet, this week they're calling those banks and those broker dealers that have been named already to try and finalize for their filings.
All right. Thanks, as always, to Bloomberg Intelligence's James Safer. We'll keep coming back to you as the days go on and we get closer to January 10th. Now, let's get more on what this actually is going to mean in terms of pricing. Joining us now, I'm pleased to say, is Glen Goodman. He is author of the book, The Crypto Trader. Glenn, good to see you again. Obviously, a lot already has happened in terms of upside for Bitcoin in anticipation of spot ETF approval. So how much is already in the price? How much further do you think this rally could go?
Well, your guy James there is on record saying he thinks that there's about a 90% chance of approval, at least of some of the ETFs. And quite frankly, it's not just him. Well, I mean, he's done really well. He's come up with a lot of the intelligence on this whole thing, but pretty much everyone is bought into this idea that the ETFs are coming. So yeah, I mean, when it comes to it being priced in, I'd say it's pretty fully priced in, probably. And when you look actually at the futures funding rates on various crypto exchanges like Binance and so on, you see that they're at quite frothy levels. A lot of people are borrowing a lot of money in order to buy Bitcoin. So if it did start falling, you could get that kind of domino effect where accounts start getting liquidated because people have overstretched themselves on the old leverage. So this is what worries me, is that it feels like a bit of a lose-lose situation, as in if you do get ETF approval, then perhaps all of that is already priced in. And if God forbid you don't get ETF approval, then who knows?
Yeah, do you have a sense of how far Bitcoin could drop if you don't get that approval? It's worth talking about because it's been a foregone conclusion by the market standards, but Gary Gensler has not been shy about cracking down on this industry.
Absolutely. That's the one factor I think that people are forgetting here, because we're hearing so many positive signs, like Cathie Wood, who you had on just the other day, talking about how there have been sort of behind closed doors discussions over the holiday period between SEC officials and, asking all kinds of technical questions, which makes it sound like they're about to dot the I's and cross the T's. But Gary Gensler, we know, he never has anything good to say about crypto, does he? So he is the unknown factor in all this. And frankly, he is the boss. So if he suddenly decides, no, it's not good enough, we need more things done. We need, for example, like the guy from BitGo recently said, maybe they will insist on separating custody and exchanges in a very, very deliberate way. Something like that. There could be all kinds of factors that could just delay this. And if we get the impression from them that the delay is open-ended as opposed to just, we just want a few final things done, then it could be really bad. And you asked me for how far the Bitcoin price could fall. I mean, we know from from past experience. When the Bitcoin price falls, sometimes it really falls in ways that stock markets very, very rarely do. You know, absolutely terrifying falls that could wipe out, I sound awful, don't I? But it could wipe out, you know, weeks, even months of gains. So what I've done, I'll tell you what I'm doing, is I'm lightening up a bit. You know, I've been long for quite a while now, following this trend all the way up. I'm lightening up. I'm not selling all my stuff because, quite frankly, this is just a theory. And maybe the price will continue rising as more and more people get excited about the ETF approval, assuming it is approved. But, you know, just to be on the safe side, I'm kind of thinking the risk reward is not looking so great at this level. So that's why I've lightened up my holdings.
Well, Glenn, it's interesting because what you're saying runs counter to what many people are telling us on this program who are very excited about what a spot ETF ultimately could mean. And obviously, when we talk about crypto, most of these tokens don't trade on anything fundamental. They maybe latch on to one narrative, like, say, a spot ETF getting approved. So in the absence of that, what other catalysts do you see for 2024 that could be supportive or not to prices across the board?
Well, I should just make the point. I'm talking short-term time scale here. When I talk about lightening up, it's because, as we know, Bitcoin, you know, Bitcoin could fall like 25% or something and barely break a sweat, you know, and then it could go all the way back up and further. So that's the kind of thing Bitcoin does. And because I'd rather not lose 25% or whatever, that's why I'm lightening up. But for the long term, Bitcoin ETF approval is fantastic news. You've talked about it loads on Bloomberg, so I won't bore you too much with it. But you know, you get the idea. It's a fantastic story for the longer term. Now, other drivers for this coming year, gaming is pretty significant. AI is pretty significant. Decentralized social media is still one to look out for, I think, because it feels like the social media space is still trying to find its feet again after the whole kind of Twitter, you know, lots of people hating Elon Musk, setting up Threads and Blue Sky and all these other platforms. It feels like there could still be space for a really major decentralized decentralized social media platform. So that's something exciting. There are lots of narratives that are good looking ahead, but frankly, the ETF approval is the best narrative of all.
Glen Goodman, the author of The Crypto Trader, we thank you so much for your time. Now we're going to switch gears. We're going to talk about Harvard School newspaper now reporting that the university's president, Claudine Gay, will resign this afternoon. She has recently been hit by allegations of plagiarism and a campus controversy over anti-Semitism. Bloomberg's David Weston joins us now for more, given that there was so much drama in recent weeks, not just about the issue around anti-Semitic speech on campus, but also about her own work. What was the straw that broke the camel's back? Do we know?
Of course, I don't know. First of all, as you said, Harvard Crimson's reporting this. I don't have it independently, and it's hard to know what went on. It would have been up to the corporation, it's called at Harvard, which is a 12-person board. I think actually they're short one person right now. It's led actually by Penny Pritzker, somebody whom we all know. And so it must have been them talking with the president. And it bears remembering, this is not just Harvard. We also had this at MIT. We had it at Penn. The Penn president stepped down. The president of the trustees, it's called at Penn, stepped down as well, Scott Bach. But there was a lot of pressure that was brought to bear. One of the interesting things here is about the plagiarism that you mentioned, Shonali. We know that the corporation of Harvard just recently said that they'd looked into that, and she'd been exonerated of any claims that, in fact, she plagiarized. Now, maybe they found new information, or maybe it just got to be too much of a distraction. I don't know.
Well, and David, it also speaks to the fact that it's not really just the Harvard Corporation or the public, for that matter, that factors in here. It's donors as well. Many of them well-known Wall Street names, like Bill Ackman, for example, that have been exerting a certain degree of pressure here. And that has not let up, even after the Harvard Corporation backed Claudine Gay just weeks ago.
Yeah, Kaylee, you put your finger right on it. There's a governance issue here, as well as other things, a governance issue. We actually had Scott Bach on, the former president of the trustees at Penn, who did step down, who got pressured by Mark Rowan, it was in the case of Penn, as opposed to Bill Ackman. And he said there's a fundamental question now about governance here. We also have talked to Larry Summers, who was the former president of Harvard, who said, you know, we have to be very careful that we don't have the Congress running these universities, or for that matter, the donors. And I must say, Scott Bach was emphatic. He said the donors can give money or not give money, but they should not determine the academics of the institution. That's up to the board. It's the corporation again at Harvard, and the president and that faculty determine. He was very emphatic in saying the donors should not have really a say in academics. Just decide to give your charitable donation or not. It's up to you.
All right, Bloomberg's David Weston, thanks very much for joining us on this breaking news. Again, the Harvard Crimson reporting that Claudine Gay will resign today. And keep in mind, she was Harvard's first black president. She just took the post up in July. So this is the shortest tenure in Harvard's history, just 6 months and 2 days. We'll have more coverage of this for you on Bloomberg Television throughout the day. But coming up here on Bloomberg Crypto, CBOE's John Palmer will join us to discuss margin Bitcoin futures and more.
And access to all the latest data and news on crypto, check out CRYP Go on the terminal. This is Bloomberg.
One great indicator, GBTC, the Grayscale Bitcoin Investment Trust, has been trading at a discount historically. That discount has really started to converge in the last few weeks and close. A second important indicator, prediction markets. How are people pricing? We see 90% certainty on approval. In the last few weeks, there's been a lot of meetings, even over the holidays, meetings of SEC staffers with some of the proposed issuers, including BlackRock, Van Eck, and others, to discuss specifics of these S1s, of these applications that have been filed. It looks like all of the small technical issues that have emerged over the last few months are starting to be discussed, resolved.
That was CoinShares Chief Strategy Officer Meltem Demirors speaking to Bloomberg. And we're going to talk more about more crypto assets here, because in addition to that price of Bitcoin rising, you're also seeing crypto options and futures seeing a surge in demand ahead of a decision on a spot ETF. There's been a steady uptick in Bitcoin's options after BlackRock applied for that ETF, driving trading volume to an all-time high. Now, some traders have been betting on Bitcoin, even hitting $50,000. Of course, Kaylee, we have not hit that level yet.
No, $45,000, though, for the first time since April 2022. Certainly nothing to sneeze at. So let's discuss this and more with John Palmer, CBOE Digital President and a former head of U.S. options at CBOE Global Markets. So, John, thank you so much for being with us. First, for CBOE Digital broadly, what would spot ETF approval actually mean for you?
I think spot ETF approval is really bullish for the overall sentiment in the market. We operate a spot market regulated in the U.S. as a money service business, and a CFTC regulated futures market and clearinghouse. And I think seeing that approval really is going to pave the way for pension funds and RIA-based funds to be able to invest assets in a spot Bitcoin ETF, where they may not be able to gain that access today in just a native spot Bitcoin token.
How do you see people using derivatives contracts, options, futures in a world where an ETF exists?
With an ETF, now we have a broader ecosystem. So you have more players, institutional players that are used to hedging their risk. And so they lean on derivatives quite heavily to be able to hedge that risk, right? And so as that ecosystem evolves, they're going to lean on those derivatives more and more as a product of being able to hedge that risk. And so I think we'll see that ecosystem on the derivative side grow with the growth in the spot ETF as well.
And when we're thinking about this derivatives activity, this would suggest institutions more so than retail, right? Or how do you see this breaking down?
It's going to be hard to judge what the breakdown is going to be yet, because we'll have to wait and see. I think generally we're going to see institutions probably start to lead the way. The associated participants that are involved with a spot Bitcoin ETF are going to want to find ways to access those hedging tools that we just spoke about. And so I think you're going to see them look for those types of markets, those trusted, those highly regulated markets like what CBOE Digital is launching on the 11th to find the access to those tools to hedge that risk. And so I think you'll see, like I said, institutions drive that, but retail will also look for that as well. And I think in crypto, we've seen a huge following in retail in terms of gaining access to derivatives, at least internationally. And so I think we'll see that trend come to the U.S. as well, as, again, we see the ecosystem continue to evolve and grow.
We've come pretty far. I remember covering when the futures were approved and the margin requirements on them. And so to think about this type of leverage being able to re-enter the system after, frankly, blow-ups in a number of exchanges, brokerages, how do you see the role of leverage interacting with the crypto community with new products like yours coming out?
Yeah, I think leverage is an important tool, right? Because you need to have capital, and you need to be able to efficiently use the capital in the market to put on the type of exposure and gain the risk-weighted kind of exposure that you want. And so trading firms look for leverage to be able to do that. I think the leverage we see in the U.S. is a lot different than sometimes the leverage that you can gain on the international market. And I think that's one key difference. Additionally, here's the governance process and the controls and the oversight that's involved in dealing with margin futures or even options, at least on the U.S. There's a significant amount of governance and oversight, regulatory processes that you have to follow in order to change the margin levels and to issue new products under the CFTC's guidance, at least for Bitcoin and ETH. And so I think that there's a big difference there between what you're potentially able to do depending on what regulatory jurisdiction you're in across the globe.
Yeah, and even in the United States, it's worth asking your opinion on the regulatory oversight that we may or may not see here that could change the way these products work. It's, I think, no secret that the CFTC has taken control of the crypto industry, perhaps a little more, offensively, rather than defensively than the SEC has. We're alphabet soup here, regulators. So what does that mean here for futures versus spot?
Well, I think in general, futures, we see a clear pathway. So we understand that Bitcoin and ETH futures and options exist today, and institutions are comfortable with the regulatory regime, and they've been trading futures on commodities for over 50 years, right? And so we're able to see that ecosystem grow, and we're seeing a lot of institutions start to move and gain more access to that ecosystem and those products because of their comfort, because they understand the venues like CBOE Digital and others that are operating in them, and they're used to that sort of ecosystem and how it's operated. On the spot market, I think generally what we want to see is clarity. Whether it's an SEC regulated or a CFTC regulated or a new regulatory regime that maybe doesn't exist, from our perspective at CBOE Digital, the clarity is what's most important, not necessarily where.
All right, that's something we hear a lot. John Palmer, CBOE Digital President, thank you so much for joining us. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Crypto. I'm Shonali Bassick in New York with Kaylee Lyons in Washington. Now to another crypto story that caught our attention. Prosecutors say that Sam Bankman-Fried will not face a second trial after being convicted of fraud last month. The U.S. told the judge that they will drop plans to try Bankman-Fried for conspiracy to bribe foreign officials, commit bank fraud, and operate an unlicensed money transmitting business, among other charges. Remember, he was found guilty of 7 counts of fraud and conspiracy and faces the possibility of decades in prison, Kaylee.
Yeah, and of course, Shonali, the fall of FTX, one of the things that shook the crypto world in 2022 and 2023, but 2024 maybe is all about the approval of a spot Bitcoin ETF. We'll be back next Tuesday at 1 p.m. Wall Street time for more coverage of that here on Bloomberg.